Right, yeah, we're on to Ray Avery. Welcome to the Luke Farr Show to motivate, educate, and inspire our next generation of leaders. Thank you, sir, for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
Absolute privilege to have you here, Sir Ray Avery. And just quickly for the people out there that aren't aware, you're a New Zealand pharmaceutical scientist, inventor, author, and New Zealander of the Year in 2010. Welcome once again. Just to give a quick backlog, tracking back many moons there. You were born in Kent, England, correct me if I'm wrong, and you spent your childhood in orphanages and foster homes. And you said you developed an interest in science at the age of 14 while sleeping rough in London and finding warmth in public libraries. I mean, wow, what an absolute whirlwind and a transition to what you've accomplished today. I mean, Ray, how tough was that growing up in that environment?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I remember, I'm actually launching in New Zealand, in the next few months, domestic violence campaign, which is trying to address the terrible domestic violence statistics we have in New Zealand. We lead the world in domestic violence, which is appalling. And so we've got a campaign. We've got about 20 media companies, including Saatchi & Saatchi and Glenso behind us. And we'll roll out this campaign to draw awareness about domestic violence, but also got some tech solutions. We invest technology, things like fintech and making commercial transactions work, but we very seldom invest in things that make the world a better place in terms of things like preventive violence. So we've got this tech coming out. But my formative years were exactly that. I remember my father breaking down my mother had hidden in the bathroom. My father knocked the bathroom locks off with a hammer. She climbed out the window and broke her leg, and then we were all in hospital looking after my mum. But then later on, my mum beat me unconscious, and I was then taken into care. And I spent the next 14 years in halfway houses, which were supposed to be, places to make us better, but they were really places of serial abuse and so on. So the only way that I could deal with that was to run away. And I did a catch-22. I'd run away for a week, go to enough stores for a week, and then go to the apple orchard and have the sun on my back and eat apples, and then go to the toilet that was in the apple field. But eventually, I had enough collateral to run away for good, and I set up a shop under a railway bridge in London, and would go to the Tate Art Gallery to keep warm and get a cup of coffee at Lions Corner House. I'd go to the library and read the Encyclopedia Britannica, which is like Google of the day. And so if you fast forward, I'm 70 odd years old, and what I've learned about life is knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. And so if you want to be an entrepreneur today, it's a lot easier actually, because you can go onto Google. I had to go to the library and put knitting needles through cards to learn about, get the right algorithm and answer for the research I was doing.
You had to understand the Dewey Decimal System.
Yeah, but of course the beauty of that was that it taught me how the algorithms work for Google. So I'm a much better fucker at getting the information out of Google because I know the algorithm. But it was horrible. It was horrible, and
it must have been
I guess that's the full circle now to wanting to do something.
Extremely traumatic. Yeah, I mean did you sort of, back then, were you suffering from any form of stress, anxiety with it all, or was it back then you just accepted it and pulled yourself up?
I think what you do is, what I learned was that you can't fix people who are abusive. You have to get away from them. And so I'd run away I'd probably run away from 30 different halfway houses or orphanages and set up shop. And all I learned was I could get on the train and get off at a train station and reinvent myself. I could, and I learned how to do marketing, social marketing from me for mess. And I would go to this. I remember being in London, and I had no food, and I went to this local. I knew that on Friday the bakeries would throw away stuff because they weren't open on Saturday mornings. So they throw away bones and things on Friday. So I went into the with my school uniform on and said, "Have you got any stale buns?" At 4 o'clock at night or just before they're going to close. And they looked at me and they said, "Piss off," because I don't know whether they thought they were opening a Pandora's box that everybody would come if they gave me some. So what I did was I sat outside in the rain. And I did that for 3 days. And on the 3rd day, they came out with a little parcel because they just watched this little guy in the rain getting wet. And that was the marketing tool. So after a week, they were giving me parcels. I arrived, the parcels all be ready. So I learned.
That's brilliant.
So I learned to be customer centric and look at other people's statements of needs, and then I help them. You know, my job in life is just to make people better than they are.
Yeah, very good, very good. What a great ethos. In regards to the domestic violence, Ray, why is it so bad here, specifically in New Zealand?
Well, there's a whole lot of epidemiology. We've got the highest teen suicide rates in the world, and when I'm talking about that, I'm not talking about, and I haven't got the graph here, but if you were looking at Greece down here, then you go up here and all the European countries, and you go up here, and right way up here, way up there is New Zealand. You're talking 18 times more likely to die of suicide in New Zealand than you would be in Greece.
Is that linked with our tall poppy syndrome in any way? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. There's absolutely. What we have is a collective society. If you show off in any way at all, you're going to get munted. So that's why we've got the second highest bullying rate in schools. And so we were necessarily, when we came here, to look after each other, to become a kind of Gloria Vale where we all looked after each other. But if somebody stands out a little bit like you and I, then there's a fair chance somebody's going to pick on you and say, look, he's showing off, and so we need to stop that and say it's okay. A friend of mine who was in advertising fronted up an advertising sort of pitch for a major organisation, and he pulled up in his McLaren car, and the CFO, Chief Financial Officer, looked down and said, that guy is obviously ripping people off. And so they didn't give him now, if that was in America, that would be the shoehorn into the stuff, because if he's successful enough to get that car, he's the right guy for the job. But we don't necessarily see that as the metric. So you show off, you're going to get munted. And then there's other underlying things, which is also the history of our, the Maoris are, are not treated in the way that they should be. They're held there. There's institutional and educational and healthcare racism in our whole system. So we're actually heading towards more like a South African metric and I've worked and lived in South Africa, where the top 15% of the country carries on and buys the yachts and buys and sells houses from each other. And then there's a whole monolayer below that that's struggling. Like, 1 in 4 of our kids goes to school hungry. Our hospital system's munted. We're a third world hospital. So I can't fix all of these things, but what I do is pick on particular issues that I can actually, try and do something with. And using all the background and experience that I've got.
Yeah, very good, and many pats on the back for you. I mean, just based on what you're saying there with the Māori, do you fundamentally think we are treating them better today than we were 10 years ago?
I think there's something's happened. When I came to New Zealand in 1973, I had this wonderful experience. I was camping by a side. I went around New Zealand to find somewhere to live, and I went around all the East Cape and all of the different places. And I realised that there was nobody in New Zealand except for Auckland in those days. There was only about three restaurants, And but when I was around the East Cape, I was camping by the side of the river, and this Maori guy came up with a whole lot of fish. He had 4 or 5 kids around him with fish, and he came up. And he said, "Who are you, mate?" And I said, "I'm just camping here, just working my way around New Zealand to see where to live." He said, "Oh, this is a good place to live, mate. No problem." He said, "Tell me, just fishing with the kids." He said, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm a pharmaceutical scientist." He said, "Like a doctor or a pharmacist?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I've had an operation." And he opened up his chest, and he had this big scar right down here where he had an open heart surgery, because it was a condition that he had associated with his lifestyle and being a Maori and blah, blah, blah. And I said, "Oh, well, I hope you get better." And he said, "See those guys fishing down there at the river? They don't know I've got a net across there. They won't catch fuck all."
Oh, brilliant.
But there was a communication that went on in those days. My next door neighbour and people in the street, somehow we've scaled to a point where we don't have that. In England, all the terraced houses, people know each other in the street. And something's happened to us. We've become a disconnected society, but still have all the bad things associated with the collective society. So if anybody shows off at school, my 2 kids have been bullied at school, one simply because she's too smart, the other one because she wants to be quiet and doesn't want to be part of the other people. So that's how that leads into all of those things. And then, of course, once you start to be disconnected and you're poor, then you turn to any panacea that will help. and usually that's drugs and alcohol. People have this misguided belief that that's the precursor to what happens, but often it's the salvation for people, and it happens in a lot of white-collar situations. I've got lots of mates who their businesses are going under because of the COVID lockdown. Restaurants, very big chain of restaurants, and the guy that's sort of heading up this thing is turning to the bottle because it just gives him a bit of peace and you know, and respite. And so,
well, I mean, it's a dangerous drug, isn't it? To be so sort of relaxed whilst you're on it and releasing the dopamine, and then an absolute.
Exactly. I mean, every rock and roll star knows that there's nothing wrong with a bit of booze at the end of. I'm not saying that's the right way to go, but I'm saying is that. There's sometimes that even I've gone there in the point in when I've been in those abusive situations, and I thought I just got to dull the pain, and you get, as long as it doesn't overwhelm you, then sometimes just at that moment it's a panacea just as much as any analgesic might be.
Yeah, good insights. Yeah, so you said, so you tracked here, you were here in 1973, and then you actually effectively became a New Zealand citizen within 9 months.
Yeah, well, again, I found home when I arrived in New Zealand, because I'd sold up all my businesses in the UK and travelled overland to try and find myself. And when I arrived in New Zealand, it was in those days, certainly it was a country where everybody talked to each other, and there was the number 8 fencing wire characteristics really were profound. You know, you could be anybody you wanted to be in New Zealand, and you still can to some degree. You can be Prime Minister. You don't have to go to a red brick university. You don't have to have millions of dollars behind you. We are really, if you look at the countries that have the highest teen suicide rates, they're countries like Iceland and Latvia. And it's because they're small communities. And if somebody gets a ski vehicle that's posher than somebody else, then they stand out and they get picked on. But at the same time, because you're a small community, you can make a big change on somebody. So you can be a person of prominence in a small community. If I was in the UK, it's unlikely would I have been knighted, even whatever I've done, because there's so many people doing all sorts of things in the UK. But if you do something in New Zealand, you're more likely to get noticed. And of course, if you're a rugby player, I don't know how many rugby players in the UK have been knighted, for instance.
Right, that might be to do with something that they're just not as good as the ones here in New Zealand, potentially, just throwing it out there. Actually, football, though. Some footballers are knighted, aren't they?
Yeah, I think the managers are often some bit.
David Beckham wasn't he?
Yeah, so but it's more common, you know, New Zealand to be glorified, you know, or you know, because we're smaller and you stand out. But there's a bifurcation about that, so you can be shown. I mean, we do great stuff. You think about things like Rocket Lab, where I remember, you know, Stephen Tyndall and I wandering through a corridor and seeing this rocket lying on a corridor in a small innovation lab in Parnell, and now look, you know, it's a real entity. So we dare to dream. When I'm giving my talks, I talk about New Zealanders have 3 characteristics that are quite different than any other country in the world. First one is that we're not fond of rules. You think that we are fond of rules, like we generally vote when we're supposed to. We drive on the correct side of the road most of the time. But if I do a talk and I say to everybody, how many people in the room have got a building, a house, or some sort of property that they've got a deck or a window that they haven't got a permit for? And whoever put their hand up, they all put their hands because they don't give a shit. It's about a metre, mum. It'll be fine. Don't worry. So we disregard things we don't give a shit about. You know, we just get on with it. You know, and that's why we can be innovative and actually try things and make things happen. And then you've got the second characteristic is that we've got no respect for the status quo. Just because we don't know something doesn't mean we won't give it a go. Things are going. So, you know, we shouldn't win the America's Cup. But we do.
Is that a lot to do with the autobiography book, Rebel with a Cause? Is there a lot of topics and sort of subject matter around that? I mean, that's the sort of question I have around that is sort of why do you think it's fundamentally so important to dream big, and why are a lot of people not dreaming big?
Well, we're lucky in New Zealand because the first thing is that makes us characteristically different is that everybody came here. Every single person that came here from somewhere else. So they got on a boat or a waka or a plane, and they travelled somewhere where they didn't know where they were going. They didn't know what it was like when they got here. So that's filtered out a lot of the mongrels that didn't have any imagination. So, you know, because I'm not going to go there. I mean, geez, you're crazy. It's our centre of the world. There's nothing down there. And so the people that went there were the true adventurers. And that's maybe why we had this collective of people that are a bit mad and try things and put basically a vacuum cleaner reversed on a boat and call it a jet boat, you know. You know,
I'm sure it's more complex than that.
So we'll give that a crack. You know, and you know, people like Colin Murdoch, who invented the world's first disposable plastic hypodermic syringe, which changed medical care globally. So we wouldn't have vaccinations without Colin Murdoch. He was selling gunpowder at his pharmacy in Palmerston North so that the hunters could get things, making his own bullets. He invented tranquilizer dart guns, you know. So because these people are allowed to play with shit and make stuff, that's what makes us innovative. I think what, if I was trying to do a kind of thesis about how it happens, it's about how you educate kids to begin with. I think the starting point is, and one of the problems with education is it tends to monk education in the sense that we're taught to rote learn stuff rather than have an imagination. So my good friend Ken Robinson used to talk about, if you want to see the funniest thing about education, go and do a video search for YouTube and Professor Ken Robinson. It's the funniest thing you'll ever see in your life about education. What he talks about is that we're actually munting kids by educating them by trying to get them to remember stuff and then report it later on, rather than getting into their education. So a good example was my daughter came to me a few years ago and said, look, I'm having trouble with my 9 times table. And I said, look, have a look at this thing. It's called a calculator. Like, and I went 9 times 7. And she said, why am I learning this shit? So we got a good point.
Exactly.
So we need to kind of change the curriculum to be creative and think about how you teach people to be innovative and have an innovative creative thinking. And I was lucky because when
Do you think it'll ever change though, Ray, or are we too deep now?
No, we can change, but you've got to be aware of, before you can fix a problem, you've got to be aware of the problem. So for me, it was easy because I was dyslexic, short-sighted. So at school, I never learned anything because there was this bunch of people at the front of the class just writing stuff. I had no idea what they were doing. At the back, I was drawing stuff. And then I'd go off and go to the library and read the Encyclopedia Britannica, which is like Google today. I got little bites of information, how things work. Now I put those things together and made things that nobody else had thought of. And I had another benefit because I was dyslexic, so I see the world in different patterns than most people. So rather than, if you give me a telephone number, I can't record it. So I remember a report from my maths teacher saying, Ray Avery is very good at mental arithmetic as long as he can write it down. So you're limited by a lot of other things. So that the education system and the metric we use got nothing to do with intelligence. Okay? So what we've got to do is teach our kids how to kind of be creative and put that in as part of the curriculum. So there's nothing about how to be innovative in, an innovative person can think of about an average of 280 things to do with a paperclip. So, a normal kid will think about 3, you know. So
do you think emotional intelligence can be taught?
Well, that's another thing. Looking at you, the shape of you. No. I think it comes back to that the whole dynamic about nurture and nature. Certainly from a nurture perspective, I've got nothing. So there was something in me that was different from my contemporaries. It mostly ended up in Borstal or committed suicide. So there was something in me that allowed me to get through that and put it aside and say, when you're that badly off, the only thing that you can do is get better, and when you get better and you've saved yourself, then the next thing you want to do is save everybody else. Yeah, that's for me anyway. That's where I landed.
Yeah, and then very Very good insights there. Because you were 11 years ago now. You were named New Zealander of the Year. I mean, how important was that for you, Ray? Like, as far as recognising all your hard work, what did that mean for you?
Well, I remember giving the speech, you know, and you know, and it was in the room were a whole bunch of Eritreans dressed in national dress and a whole bunch of Nepalese dressed in national dress, and they'd all come there. And I remember when somebody said to me, you know, you're nominated, and I said, well, I've got all these. They said, we can't tell you if you won. You know, I can't tell you if you won. And I said, well, my problem is this: that I've got these people are working in Countdown and all these other shops, and they're Eritreans and Nepalese, and I've been working in those countries for the last decade, and millions of people. In fact, by the time my youngest daughter is my age, 100 million people have had their sight restored because of those factories that we built. You know.
Wow.
So that's a good day out. And so they were very proud of me, and they wanted me to be New Zealand of the Year. And they're all dressed in traditional dress in the room, waiting for the announcements. And I said to the guy, you know, I can't, in all honesty, get them to come to this event unless there's at least a chance of me winning. And they said, we can't tell you if you won. Can't tell you, Ray. It's just not the rules. But I'd recommend they come.
And at that point, yeah, you knew, obviously.
And anyway, they all came, and then when I was announced as the winner, the Eritreans started ululating, which is a sort of, and the whole place went off. And it was the most humbling thing because all of my family was connected: my New Zealand family, my Eritrean, my Nepalese family. And as I said, you know, it's lovely to be recognised by the country that you love, and it was one of those very powerful things. But since then, I've started to see this sort of degrading of our society, and I want to try and do something about it and get us back on track in terms of being a collective society that's worthwhile, with looking after the halt, the sick and the lame, and people that we've left behind. You know, and I think COVID hasn't helped that whole issue. You know, I mean, a lot of retail businesses and small business enterprises are going under as a consequence of that. We've got other epidemiology things that are happening where the wards are now full of kids with upper respiratory tract infection because they normally have a normal immune response when they get together at school. Because they were separated and they didn't get that immune response. And now it's going through all of the wards in the hospitals. So there's a whole lot of outpourings that have come from COVID. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. And while we're on that, Ra, I do want to touch on healthcare and things like that, especially your LifePod incubator. In 2014, you and your team launched a worldwide campaign to raise $2 million for the production of the breakthrough LifePod incubator, which effectively saves lives of newborn babies in developing countries at a tenth of the price of present incubators, which can cost up to $30,000. They can also break down and are unfixable in third world countries. This is simply absolutely remarkable. I mean, how do you manage to create this essentially? Is that purely your smarts around creating this, but how did you do it sustainably?
Well, again, it's looking at all of the issues that, you know, what happens is multinational companies make products that are not really fit for purpose in the developing country situation. So when they would break down in developing countries, they'd say, we won't replace them because they're supposed to be used in a room that's air conditioned between 25 and 32 degrees centigrade. That doesn't happen in Nepal, it goes down to 4. So what we did was we were working in those countries and we could see some of the other things. These incubators were causing kids to get infections because they weren't being able to be cleaned. So it was a question of redesigning them all properly and making them cheap. And of course, the other thing is that I remember when we were trying to sell the intraocular lenses in America, and they said, where's this place Eritrea in North Africa? And where's this place, you know, Kathmandu in Nepal? We can't buy them from those countries because they're obviously rubbish. They're all going to be rubbish, you know. And it wasn't until we did a trial in the States that we got the people to buy into it. And they said, these are actually world-class lenses. It's a bit like making things in China. You can make something in China a lot quicker and easier than you might be able to do in Wellington. And so what we did was we did that. I mean, most of our R&D was done in places like India, and the Indians were the original Chinese in a sense that when the British went through there, they made the trains run on time, and they developed all these back-end technologies. So For me, it's you know, I was making my own dynamos under the railway bridge and out of old bicycle things to charge my lights at night, and I was making my own electric drills, and you know, so because I was allowed to play. You know, right now downstairs there's an incubator. My daughter's got a science. One of the downsides of being you know, a child of mine is that I tend to sort of go overboard. So when my daughter was asked to do a science experiment to show how a rocket works, I went and bought a 29.95 little rocket. You fill it up with sodium carbonate and a bit of vinegar, shake it up, and it goes off. You know, just CO2 is produced, goes off. This went premature ejaculation, rubbish. So I said, I'll build you a rocket. Went outside with a 44-gallon drum, several kilos of sodium bicarbonate, ryobi drill, and I aerodite it with 5-minute aerodite, the rocket on the top, same rocket. I knew that it was going to go over the fence at least, you know. This volume of CO2 was going to be massive. But they wrote the name of the man on the moon on the side. I got the Avery thing. I had them up against the side of the house with their screen goggles on. It was like Chernobyl, we're all ready to go. You know. Turned the thing on, the fucking thing exploded. It was just a sea of foam. It was over them, it was over the house. Mum came out and said, what happened? And I turned to the kids and I said, you okay? I said, that was fabulous, Dad, do it again. And that's education. That's what we should be teaching our kids, is to be innovative rather than learning a 10 times table. You know?
I agree. And on that note, you invented also the AccuSet IV flow controller, which was a finalist in the 2008 Saatchi & Saatchi World Changing Ideas Award, which, correct me if I'm wrong, is all about innovation. And also Protein for, a revolutionary treatment for protein energy malnutrition. For the people out there that don't know what that means, can you give us a layman's terms breakdown, please, Ray?
Well, you know, what we try and do is, what you do with any of these innovations is try and find a customer statement of need. So what's going wrong? So in developing countries, kids were dying of, particularly kids from having too much. They don't have these IV infusion pumps, which can actually give the right amount of drug to go into somebody's arm. They were using them for anesthetics and for chemo drugs. We were seeing people in cancer hospitals dying of the very potent cancer therapy drugs, which kill cancer cells, but they also kill human cells as well to a certain degree. So what was happening was they had these roller clamps which you adjust the flow with, and they would fly open, and they get 24 hours worth of a dose of stuff in about a few minutes, and then they die. So we came up with a technology that could prevent that from happening, and we could get that out at a very low cost. And the same thing was true for the nutritional products. And we've got a problem with school children in New Zealand suffering from protein energy malnutrition. You may not be aware, but we've also got things like zinc deficiency in New Zealand. We've got no zinc in our soil because we're a volcanic soil. That means that zinc is important for mental development. It's the little key that makes your synapses work. So it can actually, then maybe there's an underlying cause. Certainly Otago University found a connection between zinc deficiency and ADH and other mental illnesses. And maybe that's another reason we've got.
Really? So
yeah.
Lack of zinc can be correlated to potential ADHD disorder?
Yeah. Well, it's certainly been proven to be associated with ADHD, but it may be associated with other mental health problems. So we don't know if that's one of the reasons we've got the highest teen suicide rate. Is it a combination of diet and also culture? You know, what I'm lobbying the government to do is to do a nutritional survey of all kids in New Zealand, where they take blood samples and actually see what deficiencies we've got in our kids. Because again, we've got the second highest obesity rates in New Zealand compared with the rest of the OECD, only second to America. And our wards are full of diabetes patients. And that's all to do with, we've got the highest rate of fast food advertising in the OECD as well. In other words, if you go on TV at night, you'll see all of the things. You'll see more of these than you will in Sydney and certainly in the UK. And so we're telling our kids to eat this stuff. In other countries, they ban.
Sadly, also those restaurants create these things called the Heart Foundation, which, I mean, there is just so much hypocrisy amongst those big restaurants and big money.
Well, of course, that's the thing. It's a question of, like, you've got McDonald's and Ronald McDonald House. It's like, you know, it's like
Exactly. Here's the food that creates cancer, but let's create a charity that then gives money back to the cancer. It's just same with the poker machines, right? A lot of the beneficiaries are in there gambling, but it's all very cyclical, right?
Yeah, I know. So there's all that kind of that debris. But I think for all of us, if we wanted to think about what we should be doing, and I've just did a post on LinkedIn, and if I could give any of your viewers a kind of reference point for life, it would be it's not what you do in life that necessarily defines you, and it's certainly not what you were that defines you. So in other words, I was brought up in orphanages and beaten the shit out of them, but that didn't define me. I decided to do what I wanted to do. But what I do every day is to think about, when I'm gone, what's going to be on my tombstone? What will people say about me, and how do I want to be remembered? So it's what you leave behind, because in Nepal they say you don't die as long as you're remembered in somebody's heart. So my job is also not just to do stuff, but to inspire other people to do stuff. And that's what I do when I'm doing my talks to the kids at school and saying, you can be anything you want to be. It's just you've got to find that bit of magic in yourself, because nobody's going to do it for you. You've got to find that little bit of that little germ that can be
find the zest.
Yeah. So once you find that, then you're free. So, and it was interesting to see what people's response was when what they wanted to be on their tombstone. But the one that I liked the best was one from Peter O'Toole, and he had sent his, and you'll love this, because he sent his favourite leather jacket off to be cleaned at the cleaners, and it was covered in blood, and from the fights he had in the pubs with his mates, getting with all the drugs.
Oh, very good.
And he was covered in sick and vomit, and because he was out drinking with all these famous, drinking mates, of that time, of that ilk, and they sent it back and had a little card in it. It said, "We're sorry to return this. It did live up to our highest standard of work." And he said, "That's what I want on my tombstone."
Oh, what a great yes, he did. I like that. That makes
so he was honest, because he knew in his lifetime he'd done all this stuff and been on the TV, but he was at the end of the day a reprobate, and he had lived his life like that. And for me, I want to have the only way that I can justify all of the kind of pain and stuff that went on early on is to do something really remarkable. And part of that is my daughters. I've got 2 young daughters now, and right now downstairs there's an incubator being made for a science experiment for my daughter, with a light bulb in it, and we're drilling holes in bins to make it get the right temperature. And she's blessed.
Oh, wow.
Because she's got a dad that gives a shit and wants her to be the best mini me,
Yeah.
But she's going to go on and change the world far more than I probably ever would. She's writing her own code. She's 12 years old. She writes her own code and builds computers. And that's allowed to happen because I've thrown in the other stuff, the creative stuff. And so, she can use a nail gun. Surprisingly, though, each time she uses it, she seems to be surprised by the big bang. She goes, bang. I haven't quite got that sorted. But what I do is...
How old is she, Ray? How old is she?
She's 12, yeah, 12.
12. And she's writing code and using nail gun.
Yeah, so she's a mini me. Some of that gene pool went through the whole thing, and so she's... but she's had the benefit of everything that I didn't have, in the sense that from the very earliest thing, I would be showing her how the world works, whether it's gravity, just drop a ball and say that's called gravity. It's 33 and a 33rd feet per second, but you don't need to know that. You just need to know that that's an energy source. You can use that to do all sorts of things with. And I think that's what I'd like to do for education, is to change the paradigm and just get kids. See, when you go to school, when you're in preschool, there's all these drawers that you can open. You can pull out toys and play with them. And when you go to proper school, you have to put a uniform on, and we standardise you. You've got to have your uniform on, you've got to put a cap on, and you'll learn all of these rote learning things, and that distracts you from any imaginative thinking. And and you don't get to do any imaginative thinking until you probably go to university. But you've already sort of culled out a lot of people because they're in various disciplines, and they might have been a better something else, because you didn't expose them to all the things that they might have wanted to be.
Yeah, I do like the Montessori approach. What are your thoughts around Montessori schools?
Well, I think I'm not interested in particular disciplines, particularly because there's all sorts of different schools. I mean, the Russians were very good at building gymnasts because they got anybody who they saw wanting to be a gym or being good at gymnastics, they pushed them down that route, and that might have been just as bad, you know, in terms of they might have been a great singer. So what I want kids is to just explore life and give them more information about the way the world works in terms of early on stuff, rather than, there's no point in actually, I mean, handwriting is an interesting thing. I was told off, you know, I'm an artist and I used to write these beautiful handwritten sort of things, and they said, you're only getting eight words to a line, you've got to make it smaller, you know. And it's all about that. I mean, now, I mean, I'm dyslexic, so when I was writing stuff, and my spelling would be atrocious, but now, of course, on a computer, not a problem. So a lot of stuff's been taken up, all the problems associated with the learning process or having a calculator. Why should you remember the 10 times table? You know,
I do love the predictive typing though, that when it pops up and says, did you mean this word? I did actually. How did he know I meant that word? That's lovely. A bigger word than I never knew anyway.
Exactly, but that's exactly right. So I think eventually the AI will be able to make us converse like a conversation. We've had some dead ends with, you know, we didn't get the software working. We had voice recognition. We could just actually write something for it, but it was just too different. The algorithms were just too hard. But what we've got is a very slick system now where you've got grammar checks and so on. But even all of that, I think, is going to change in terms of the need for such more comprehensive correspondence through you know, writing. We certainly, I mean, I would have to write, if I was at Bunnings and I wanted to get a code for something, I have to write it down. Now I take a photograph, take it to somebody. So I don't, for my writing skills, don't matter anymore to some degree. Maybe 2050, there's no handwriting because you don't need it. You know, so we've just got to think about society and the way the society changes. I'm lucky enough to be able to remember going to the bank, and there was a guy with a ledger. He had a ledger with my bank details. He should write in every transaction. You know,
really?
Yeah, it was all handwritten. You went in, you wrote a check, and he wrote out a check. I mean,
he must love these new banking apps.
Well, no, but even so, you know, there were no calculators. Where I was doing calculations in my lab when I was 15 years old with a slide rule. There were no mechanical calculators at all, not even mechanical. You know, not that could be with the degree of accuracy of the slide rule. And then, of course, the first thing was we started to get mechanical things, and they typed them in. Of course, remember all those printers that we used to have? These are association with typewriters. And you know,
they certainly let you know that you're there. You can hear them from afar. You mentioned the word comprehensive correspondence, and I do want to talk about our COVID response, Ray. And I was reluctant to talk about it, but it is a hot topic, and obviously very tragic. But you quoted last year in October 2020. Everyone is slapping themselves on the back, saying that we're all fine, but you have no idea of the pandemic that could go through this country like shit through a goose. And if we don't progress the real issues and underpinning the transmission of the disease, we could be in some form of catastrophe. But what are the real issues, Ray, and how do you think we're currently tracking?
Well, the reality is, of course, that the algorithms are actually quite complex, but on my background in that area has been reducing hospital-acquired infections in developing country hospitals. So we've been able to reduce hospital-acquired infections in hospitals in places in Africa and Asia by simply getting people to wear the right PPE, the right protective gear, and the right cleaning and sanitisation agents. So we've been able to reduce hospital-acquired infections by up to 80% in these things, just because they don't have any money, they don't have technology. But if you put a surgical mask on, you won't be protected against COVID. But if you put an N95 mask on, or an N95, 99 mask, or one that's fitted properly, you won't get COVID. And that's protecting our frontline staff. Right now in New Zealand, most of our frontline staff have never had those masks fitted. That's right. Right now, as of now. Okay, that's under the Official Information Act. So we're way behind with doing that. We've got the second highest rate of hospital-acquired infections in the developed world. If you go to hospital, you're more likely to get an infection that's life-threatening in New Zealand than you would in most other developed countries in the world. So that's, yeah, absolutely. So that's the stuff.
And why?
Well, because they haven't been trained properly, they haven't been issued with the right equipment. And of course, the hospitals are. We've got all the DHBs are like independent oligarchs. I was the head of the New Zealand Health Innovation Hub, where we tried to get them to work together to address this issue of hospital-acquired infections. And once the data started to come in, that some hospitals were worse than others, they all walked away because they thought they were being audited and they didn't want to contribute to trying to fix it. So we've still got that situation. We've got understaffing in our hospitals with nursing staff. There are people being treated right now with diabetes with drips in corridors because there's not enough beds. A lot of our hospitals have got black mold crawling around on the walls. There's a high degree of microbiological contamination in these buildings. So we haven't got a good basic healthcare system. Overlaying COVID on top of that, if we do get a massive infection, and the epidemiology of the world is that we've only ever eliminated one infectious disease in the whole world, and that was smallpox. Only one. So the notion that you can eliminate a disease in isolation in New Zealand is just stupid, because eventually it's going to get in. We've got some fishing boats that are coming in with guys on. There's going to be somebody that gets through the net of the, and we've seen it already because we've had immunity from transmission. So the notion that you can have border quarantine facilities that actually protect you, it's a bit like the old, going back to the old 1800s or even the 12th century, where we used to build moats around castles and expect that that was going to prevent the devil from outside coming in. And every castle was ever eventually overrun because they had to open the door for something, or for some food, or to go out. And that's what's happening, of course, right now. We're letting people in, opening borders, and eventually we will have an outbreak. My problem is that we don't have a real protection in our hospital systems at the moment. In other countries, they have very intensive, like Taiwan. I did some work in Taiwan, building negative environmental contained facilities that were appropriate for making sure patients didn't get infected. And if you look at some of the pictures you see in places like Taiwan, they're all suited up completely. And I can show you pictures of in our MIQ where there's a nurse taking a sample of somebody who may be infected. The hair coverings are all out. She's got a standard mask on, and she's not wearing the right PPE.
And that could not be, but that could not surmise the laid-back Kiwi culture of she'll be right, mate, of New Zealand, don't.
Exactly. So until the shit hits the fan, nobody's gonna say, because that's why I'm talking about the backpacking, because saying we're okay. We've shown you guys, but if you take the reason that we're in such good shape is, of course, our location. So if you look at other countries that are island nations, the Falkland Islands is doing far better than us, and virtually no infections at all.
Wow,
because they're an island.
That's scary. Are you an advocate for the vaccine, and what are your thoughts around the efficacy?
Well, what's happening with the efficacy is, of course, we, like all vaccines and like all things, we learn as we go on. This is a very unprecedented thing. This is the first vaccine that's ever been globally released without any real long-term epidemiological studies that have been done. The original study was only done on, I think, 230,000 people, the original study. So what we're learning now, of course, and Pfizer's latest information is that the vaccine potency will probably wane after 6 months only. So that means people have to have a booster shot. And that's a whole logistic problem, like tracking people who've had it, when's the right time for them to have it, because unlike having...
it'll only likely be effective for 6 months.
No, they're protected pretty much 95% effective for 6 months. But after that, the effectiveness of the vaccine drops off. Okay, so... Right. So you can get infected. And then, of course, there's other things. The other thing about the vaccine is that you're going to understand how it works. So if I gave you the vaccine and me the vaccine, what happens is your immune system responds to it and my immune system responds to it. But my immune system is different from yours. So mine's much more
I
powerful.
think so.
Mine's much more, trust me, mate. Mine's much more powerful than the amount of alcohol that you've drunk. No. What it is to do your natural immune system. So if I get stung by a mosquito, I will just blow up in that area because all my immune system sends all that stuff. I've got more white blood cells than you because I know that from doing trials at the Auckland Hospital. Well, I had to compare myself with other trialists. So my immune system is very potent. So if you give me the vaccine, it will be very powerful in enabling me to kill the bugs. But if your basic immune system is weak, then it doesn't help a lot. It'll help a bit, but you still might get infected because your immune system is buggered anyway. Okay. So
have you had the vaccine?
No, I haven't. No.
Are you going to have it?
No, I personally aren't going to have it because I'm a guy who does a thing called failure mode cause risk analysis. And failure mode cause risk analysis, what can go wrong? And you've got to weigh up the benefits of getting the disease versus the risks that might be involved in having a product that there's a lot of adverse reactions occurring, and we're getting more and more information about that. And so for me, I'm not at risk in the sense that I've spent a lot of my life working in hospitals with very infectious diseases. But what I do when I go into the supermarket, or I go into closed room environments with a lot of other people, certainly traveling on the plane, I'll wear an N95 mask, the best mask you can get. And so I protect myself, make sure. So that's what I'm doing, is I'm protecting myself.
Right. So no vaccine, but just that very secure mask. Oh, sorry, I've just gone off there.
Yeah. So I protect myself.
Just that mask, and you feel as though
the other thing is that apart from the people that are in my office, I don't go out much these days.
Oh, right. Oh, so you're safe.
Well, you know, I used to travel 6 months a year in developing countries, and so not only does our travel bill down, but I spend more time with my kids, and you know, so I think the other thing is that we don't have community transmission at the moment. I might review things if we had a huge pandemic, but the reality is a lot of the backslapping is to do with the luck that we have with being where we are at the arse end of the world, with having a very limited. We've got one of the lowest population densities in New York State. There's probably 1,000 times people per square kilometre than there is in New Zealand. So that's the problem. And same thing's true for Melbourne. I mean, you have to look at the social things. The reason that the Australians are suffering at the moment is because there's no way in Maroubra, which is a Greek community where my wife comes from, there's no way you can lock them up. They all go to each other's houses. They don't give a shit. So that's.
Sorry, did you say in New York there's 1,000 more people per kilometre than New Zealand?
Well, in New Zealand, for instance, we've got only 13 people per square kilometre, right? There's only 30 on average, you know. So
but that's remarkable.
So the problem is that's the problem. If you've got a high population density, if you go into a small room with like a plane, for instance, then although the air conditioning is working very well, you've got all those people, they're producing about 1,000 particles of dead skin cells, sorry, a million particles per hour of dead skin cells, bacteria, yeast and mold, they're flying off them. So when you're in a closed room environment, all this produces a bacterial fog. And that's why the biggest infection was at this wedding where everybody was together. And so that's why they ban the large gatherings, because you don't want a whole lot of people together. That's how you get the mass infections happening very quickly. What I'm saying is we're still woefully unprepared in our hospital systems. Our hospital systems are totally overwhelmed at the moment with the current problems that we have. And one of the side effects of these things, which people don't understand, is that what we know about the virus now with new emerging research is that natural immunity is better than synthetic immunity. So now if you get COVID and recover, your immunity probably will last you pretty much a lifetime. But the synthetic one, for some reason, doesn't impart that. The other part of it is that when you do things that are, you know, apart from munting the economy, so we've munted the economy because we shut everything down, and the retailers and the people involved in the hospitality industry are going to the wall, is that you have these other hidden side effects. And that is that right now our wards are chocker full of kids with upper respiratory tract infections because they normally get herd immunity. by going to school. Because they were separated and made at home, we've got this lag where we're seeing more of those things happen. So natural immunity is usually what happens when you get infected, you get the flu, and you get over it, and But there's no way on God's earth that we're going to eliminate COVID in New Zealand as an isolated nation. If it's pouring in from all the rest of the world, it will eventually break through into New Zealand, but we have to be prepared for it. So educating people about wearing masks, social distancing, and certainly getting our hospitals up to scratch. I often go to the hospitals and see the nurses, the stress that they're under right now, let alone a pandemic. So we're really underprepared for a pandemic. So I think we should be very cautious about saying, it's a bit like the wonderful ads that we have for 100% pure New Zealand. We've got lead in our water. You can't swim in
exactly. I know. It's a bit cheeky. It's a bit cheeky. Some of those adverts that come out from New Zealand tourism. Hey, Suray, Avery, that is all we have time for today. I do want to thank you sincerely for coming on the show. Honestly, you've been an absolute privilege. Great insights and providing some really, really good education to the youth out there. That is Luke Farr from the Luke Farr Show to motivate, educate, and inspire our next generation of leaders. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Have a great day. Thank you.
Good. I'll just hit the stop record. That's just good. You'd think I'd be fine with phones these days, being 33.
Looks like you got as much technology as me, mate.
Exactly. The record doesn't want to